This is the Safe and Sustainable Urban Streets training. However, I did want to announce a couple of other things before we get into it. So the first of these is that tomorrow morning we have a session focused on building feminist cities. It's being hosted by GIZ, and they will be including a Jane's Walk, which essentially is an opportunity for us to walk the streets around the ADB HQ here in Manila and to use that to trigger insights and discussions about things that are problematic in urban street design for walking and opportunities to improve those. And I guess for anyone who's spent much time here in Manila, you'll note there is plenty of content for that here in Manila. So it'll be, I think, an insightful discussion. Not only will it highlight the many opportunities for improvement, but there'll be a lot of discussion about the difficulty of making changes in the built environment in high density cities such as Manila. There's not a lot of space to spare. The second announcement I wanted to make is that over the last couple of days, we have been hosting some people training and playing with the new AI tool that we have developed for road safety here at ADB. Our IT department have been very busy in populating the AI tools with a whole lot of references that iRAP and ourselves have been providing them with to build up a tool a bit like ChatGPT that you'll be familiar with, that's focused just on road safety. There's a desk just outside this room. So when we break at afternoon tea, and if you wish to have a play with that, I'd encourage you to think up whatever questions on road safety you have to put into that. And the important thing at this stage is perhaps not so much to try to find the perfect answers, but to help us train the AI to give him better answers. We're very much at the early, we're educating an AI. So we would really ask you to help us do that. Okay, that AI, by the way, is primarily to support a new road safety good practice note that we have written, authored largely by Greg and his team at iRAP. And it's intended to assist the project officers at ADB and within our developing member countries to produce better quality road safety within our infrastructure projects. Okay, so welcome then to the Safe and Sustainable Urban Streets training. This is a module in the Asia Pacific Road Safety Observatory's Road Safety Capacity Building Program. For those who didn't notice, this program actually won Prince Michael Award recently in collaboration with iRAP and with the Global Road Safety Partnership. In fact, one of the great successes of this program has been collaborations with other organisations, and we're very pleased today to be collaborating again with iRAP, but also with the Global Designing Cities initiative. So in the room, we have us from GDCI, Abhimanyu Prakash. Abhi is down here and will host much of the afternoon session along with his colleague Uditi Agarwal. So welcome to both of you. It's great to have you here in Manila. From iRAP, we have Greg Smith over here. We have Jagesh Bhavsar over here, and online is Monica Aslajas, who will be helping us host some of the online discussions. And our special guest today is Shivani Gupta, who sits down the back of the room from the Global Disability Innovation Hub. And it's great to have you joining us here. Shivani, welcome. There will be a lot of opportunity for discussion and Q&A today, but it will largely occur in the breakout sessions. Hang on to all your questions, write them down. There'll be plenty of opportunity, but it will come at particular stopping points through the afternoon. Before I leave the stage, I would like to thank the people of Japan because the Asia Pacific Road Safety Observatory is funded through the government of Japan, through the Japan Fund for a Prosperous and Resilient Asia. And without that support, we would not be able to deliver these capacity building efforts such as today. Okay, and then finally, this is a training program. We will be issuing e-certificates of participation for those who have both participated with us and left us with your email addresses. Okay, so the urban setting is both a place where we live and hopefully we thrive, but that is not always the case. Transport, in fact, is a big component of whether or not our urban environments are going to help us thrive and become all the potential that we as humans have to become. But it can also hold us back dramatically. And today we're going to talk about the challenges of introducing change into urban environments. This is a big issue, particularly across Asia. You know, we have large, highly populous urban environments. This is perhaps the largest, consistent, unique thing about Asia and the Pacific. You know, we are the home of large, bustling cities, huge, densely populated cities that are largely, if you like, full, and we want to transform these spaces into sustainable spaces. This is in no way an easy exercise, either technically or collectively in consultation with the community. So today we're going to be focusing on how we go about making some of those changes. We're going to talk about the process by which decisions get made, who we need to talk to, how do we make sure that we're introducing sustainable changes into the environment. So without further ado, allow me to ask Abby to come to the stage and get us started. So welcome everybody, and welcome Abby.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abhimanyu Prakash. I'm the Associate Director of Strategy and Development at the Global Designing Cities Initiative. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you. Firstly, a huge thanks to Dave, the team at ADB and APRSO, as well as Greg and the team at iRAP for co-organizing and inviting us to be part of this workshop. And just for the online audiences who we have in the room as well, alongside Uditi, who's here with me in person, we have two of our colleagues from GDCI in the online room who will help with the breakout sessions. We've got Lucia Della Mora and Francisca, who will be joining shortly. So for those of you who are in the online version, please don't feel left out, because you will be having folks supporting you through the entire process. Before I begin with my presentation, I just wanted to give a little bit of a heads up that unlike typical workshops where there are lots of presentations and then a workshop at the end of it, we've changed the format a little bit. After the first presentation itself, we'll break out into groups for our workshop. And the workshop will be paused intermittently 3 times for 3 shorter presentations in between, which will all act as different prompts for each of you through the workshop session. I'm not going to discuss and go much into the agenda, but just start talking about why are we even talking about streets to begin with, and the role that street design can play in shaping our urban environments. And when we often look at streets, we forget to look at them at the bird's eye view for a second and realize that it is the largest continuous network of public space in our cities. Our cities, as Dave mentioned, are densely populated, and it is important to provide public space, and streets can do that. Sorry. And our streets are the platform, of course, to move. We often talk about mobility as a very, very big part of our streets. But streets are also the place for play for our children, places where they can learn to ride. We know we have a lot of outdoor dining in many of our Asian cities that we all live in and work in. Celebrations also happen on our streets. Streets are where people perform, where people are dancing, a lot of people are making money, and places where we spend a lot of our money. They are places where we can spend time with a lot of our old friends due to the lack of personal space. Or we can also meet new ones, and it can all happen on our streets. It's places where we can enjoy some nature, where we can relax, and they are the front doors to our homes and businesses. But this is how we have been shaping and designing our urban streets for many, many years at this point. And we've been doing this globally. We have been taking pride in success of our cities by the kilometers of flyovers and bridges that have been built, in the number of millions of dollars invested in skywalks for pedestrians. Despite large streets, we've left our pedestrians and the most vulnerable to these tiny slivers in the middle of our streets, where they're risking their lives every day going to work, kids going to school, and they're navigating difficult situations. And we often forget to even design for the people with disabilities on our streets. And even for the able-bodied, it's often difficult to navigate them, making it even much more challenging for people on wheelchairs and with other disabilities. It's almost like we as designers or project managers have designed streets which are telling people that you don't matter. You don't matter as much as these guys sitting inside metal boxes. There are over 1.19 million traffic fatalities happening each year, which means one person dying every 37 seconds. So by the end of today alone, over 3,000 people all around the world, and Asia is a very large contributor to this number, would have died on fatalities on the streets. We in Asia are very proud of our young population, but it is the #1 killer of people between the ages of 5 to 29. But the good thing is that these deaths are preventable, and we know what to do. It has to be a combination of multiple factors. It's a combination of innovative street design that reduces speed, strict enforcement against traffic violations, and legislative ordinances that can help lower speed limits. But very, very important in all of this is public awareness campaigns, which can communicate this to people. And all around the world, these have seen to be impactful strategies that have saved lives. So it's time that we start taking action. And some of the points that we encourage people to do, people like all of you in the room, is to think about these 4 areas to make your streets safe and sustainable. To begin with, it's important that we lower speeds because we know that speed kills. And it has to be done jointly through policy and through design. This graph from our colleagues at the World Resources Institute shows that when a pedestrian is hit at 30 kilometers an hour by a motor vehicle, there is a 90% chance of survival for that pedestrian. But the minute that goes up by every kilometer, reaching up to 60 kilometers an hour, which is very often an operating speed at non-peak hours in our cities, it results in a 90% chance of death. And this is what we need to address. We need to bring down the speeds in our cities, because our human bodies can only withstand a limited amount of force. And even if some of our kids may love these suits, we can't be walking around in these protective shells, particularly in the climate that we all live in Asia. It is speed that reduces the visibility, increases the stopping distance and the reaction times. And speed is the single largest factor that turns crashes into fatalities. And because of this, many cities around the world we can learn from and take inspiration, like the city of Valencia, which has dropped its urban speed limits to 30 kilometers per hour in all internal streets. It's only some of the primary corridors that are allowed to ply at 50 kilometers. Campaigns like 20 is Plenty in the United Kingdom, the city center of Christchurch in New Zealand, and Paris can be all learned from to reduce speed limits in their urban cores. And it's not just the global north. The global south is also starting to shift towards this. The city of Bogota, very similar in terms of population and density, like our Asian cities, has also taken this approach where corridor-wide speed reduction drops have shown a reduction in speed limits and the number of lives saved in turn. The second factor that we need to work on is design streets that prioritize people, not cars. And we often get asked the question, can design help reduce speeds? And yes, it can if we start prioritizing people. Because the minute you start looking at this curve extension, you can see that the turning speed, the fumes emitted, the visibility, all of that for our pedestrians increases, and the speeds for cars turning can go down. When we look at large roads like this, redistributing the space for different road users, for different people, can show how you have narrower lanes to reduce speed limits, median infrastructure, cycle tracks, refuge islands, and added crossings for safety. One of the most contested projects that our chair, Janet Sadiq Khan in New York, had worked on was in this Prospect Park West corridor, where the vehicles above the speed limit was 74%. But just by putting people first and redistributing, so the parking was maintained, but just lanes were narrowed, and they saw a drop in the number of cars moving above the posted speed limits. So it is our environment that influences our behavior, and we cannot be blaming the users. A typical situation, if this bus was to hit this pedestrian, the typical reaction would be he was crossing the street at the wrong place. But that is because our block sizes are too long. We don't have frequent crossings, and we need to do that. The person is forced to react to his or her environment when they're doing so. So the problem is the infrastructure that we have funded, we have created, designed, and managed. And so it is the responsibility of the ones that design the system to change it, because bad design can promote unsafe behavior, but good street design can act as a self-enforcing tool to ensure safe behavior for all road users. The third aspect, after putting people first, is to prioritize sustainable mobility choices. And we know at the bank, there's a lot of discussion around active mobility, around public transit, and investing in such projects. And it's about not subsidizing further or prioritizing the private motor vehicle, but just making sustainable transportation options available to people and make sure that when they're available, they're comfortable, affordable, safe, and convenient. So simply just making it easier not to drive. And it does not mean being anti-car. We know that cars are not going to go away from our cities anytime soon, but it just means that we want to provide people with more mobility choices when we're designing our streets. And we have been funding and supporting more widening of streets and more travel lanes, but it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you add more lanes, it resolves the problem for a few days, few weeks, maybe even a few months, but eventually there are more cars and more congestion. And of course, I don't need to preach to the choir sitting over here, but we all know that sustainable transportation modes are often much more efficient because the carrying capacity is many times more than people sitting in private cars or transit sitting in mixed traffic. I'm sure most of you have seen graphics like this, that we need how much space to move 50 people through the different modes, whether pedestrians, cyclists, a bus, or people in private automobiles. But we know that our cities are moving towards other epidemics. The autonomous vehicle. The space needed to move people in autonomous vehicles still remains the same. Even our ride-sharing apps, it's still the same number of people in cars and automobiles on our streets. So it's up to us that as our cities grow, do we want more and more people moving like this? Or do we want them to continue moving more equitably and sustainably through our cities? And a little bit of graphic work, as well as testing these formulas, we have seen that the same right of way of streets, when redistributed, can carry up to 2.5 times more people. And so it's time that we start shifting a different problem from moving cars on our streets to moving people. And we don't think there are better set of people than all of you who are in this room to be able to come up with solutions to resolve that. But we know all of you can't do this alone. And so today's workshop is going to focus a lot on the different stakeholder groups and others that need to be engaged through the process of shaping streets. And some of whom we engage with at the GDCI are engineers within city government and private consultants, the traffic police in different parts of the world, the journalists who communicate this with different community members, as well as different members from city agencies. And of course, a very big part of our work is engaging with community members, people of different ages and abilities. So we need to keep reminding ourselves that a project plan often has a whole host of different stakeholders. These are just a few of them who we have written, but there are probably many, many more that you can map out for your personal context that you end up working in, who are involved in shaping streets in your city. And what working together provides is an opportunity to quickly transform our streets. And we can often do these using temporary and interim materials, which can then build a case to make them much more permanent. And some of the places, I'm just showing a few examples of projects that we have worked on at GDCI around the world. And all these projects that I'm showcasing started as interim projects, but have formed their way into capital construction or citywide programs, like the school zone project in Bosa in Bogota, where just using chalk and cone, we did this. And then the city scaled it up to 10 or 15 school zones across the city. The large, giant intersection in Mumbai, which was transformed without taking away a single travel lane. It was just reclaiming all the extra space available on the street to create space for pedestrians, for their safe movement and crossings. And we saw that when we asked people, they felt safer, they liked the intervention, and they wanted it to become permanent. Large roundabouts like this that we see all across our contexts in cities can be transformed into looking like this. Again, temporarily collecting the right metrics. And today this project stands as a capital constructed project because of the metrics that were collected, which showed that there were 52% fewer conflicts, people felt safer, and it improved the road safety. And the last project is from the city of Addis Ababa, where a project went through an entire life cycle. This giant intersection in the middle of the city went through a chalk trial, just with chalk and colored paint. After collecting the metrics, the city invested into a 6-month interim project with permanent paint and bollards. And finally, the city saw the data, saw the reduction in speeds, the improvement in safety, and that led to this being completed into a capital construction process. And how we helped them sustain this beyond just one intersection was working with the city to launch a safe intersections program, where they institutionalized funding, manpower, and stakeholders to transform 10 intersections every single year from here on. So we hope that the workshop today as well as many of the tools that we'll be sharing with each one of you, will provide you with the tools to reimagine, reinvent, and redesign streets that are safe and sustainable. Thank you. With that, I'm going to pass the floor for another short presentation by Greg Smith from iRAP, and then we will encourage all of you to take your seats and break out into the groups for the workshop.
Hi, everyone. While they're getting the slides ready, I'll get started. So I'm Greg Smith from the International Road Assessment Program, or iRAP. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming along to this session. We do promise it's going to be interactive, and you will be taking the main stage quite soon. So we'll keep this presentation as short as possible. But I just wanted to take a moment to talk about the theory of change of safe streets and its linkages to impacts. The theory of change process is incredibly valuable when you're shaping any of your projects. What it's really about is understanding the evidence-based linkages between the final impact that you're trying to achieve, the interim results that lead to that impact, the actions and the outcomes or the outputs that you produce in your project, and what you put into that project to make that happen. So I'll just jump to the next slides. So really, a theory of change, if you're not familiar with it, is a set of expectations held by you, the project team, about how your project is going to make an impact. So how each of the outputs that are produced in a project lead to short-term results, long-term results, and a final impact. It's a core part of what every Asian Development Bank project includes when it's in the shaping and the planning process, and is incredibly important in all projects that you're doing. One of the key elements, I'll just jump back here. One of the key elements is the idea that you start with the long-term impact first and work backwards, tracking all the elements that you know will help to cause that impact. So rather than starting at the bottom where you think about what is my project going to do, and then figure out what impact it has later, flip that upside down and think about what impact you want and what are all the steps that you need to take in order to achieve that impact. There's a lot of really good resources to help you in this space when you're thinking about your projects. So on the right-hand side there, you can see the ADB's own guidelines for developing what they call design and monitoring frameworks for their loan projects. And the results, the theory of change process is a core part of that. So really useful document. It's specific for ADB, but actually it's the principles in there and the processes are applicable for anyone shaping projects like this. The GDCI Global Street Design Guide, there's a hard copy of it and some of its sister publications down there that the GDCI team has put together. Gives so much evidence about the linkages, the causal linkages between street design and all sorts of impacts. And the Road Safety Toolkit is also incredibly valuable because it gives you lists of types of road crashes that occur, types of safety treatments that can be used and their impacts and their costs, and also a wealth of case studies and resource materials. One point I just really want to emphasize is the incredibly important role that safe streets have in terms of all sorts of impacts, and particularly in the Sustainable Development Goals. In fact, road safety and sustainable transport underpins every part of the Sustainable Development Goals, but it particularly affects things like, obviously, reducing or health benefits. So obviously reducing numbers of deaths and serious injuries on our roads helps to helps us to achieve the targets on health and safety. But we know that road crashes are also closely linked with poverty. Families that are poor, who suffer road crashes, are more than likely being thrust even more to be made even more poor as a result of that. Children need good transport to get to and from school, so it affects their education. We know that streets that feel safe, including particularly with street lighting, are ones that women report are more like where they're more likely to walk. So it has an impact on gender. So I think when you're thinking about these projects, you can think about all the different types of impacts that you might be able to link this to, which helps to build a strong justification for the work that you might be doing. So let's do a quick and simple example. So this is a quick sketch of a result, a theory of a change process where we're focusing on safe streets leading to an economic impact. So increased economic activity. So let's just focus in on the impact first. And like I said, it's always important when you're doing this theory of change and thinking about all the linkages between what you're doing and the impacts to work from the top down to the bottom. So increasing economic activity in a city, it's a core goal basically for every city. How do we ensure that our streets have lots of businesses, lots of jobs, and lots of retail, lots of economic activity to create a sustainable environment? Ways that we might measure that are number of storefronts on a block of road, number of jobs in an area, the percentage of vacant retail spaces that might disappear as you build the safe streets, number of vendors, what are the retail rents and land values. So this is a typical impact that the Asian Development Bank is very keen on achieving in many countries, and many countries and cities themselves are very keen to do that. There's many ways that you can achieve that, but we know that creating safe streets is a really, I guess, proven way of doing that. There's a very strong evidence base and linkage between those two things. And you can find that evidence in the GDCI guide as well. But online, if you do a Google search for linkages between pedestrian activity and economic activity in a city, there's dozens of case studies about how that causal relationship works. So we might say, okay, one of the things we're going to focus on is trying to get more people walking and cycling in our city, because we know that there's that causal link between the two. But we also want to make sure it's a safe street as well. If a street is unsafe, people are not going to walk there, people are not going to cycle there. So our long-term changes that we're trying to achieve, let's say, are getting more people walking and cycling and making it safe. The short-term change that might lead to that long-term change is that, for example, number one, people feel safe and comfortable when they're using the streets. That walking and cycling is convenient and the streets are objectively safe. And there's various ways that you can measure that. These indicators include the pedestrian and bicycle star ratings, for example. We know that a 5-star road environment is much safer than a 1-star road environment. The percentage of people that tell us that they feel safe, do surveys of the local community. Are we tracking to say that people are feeling better when they walk on their road environment? That walking and cycling travel times is a measure of the convenience. Is it quicker now to walk along this road than it was before as a result of the project? Is it quicker to cycle around than it was before? And waiting times that influences the travel times, waiting times at intersections, for example. We know that that's a key barrier for people when they're walking. If they have to wait too long in an intersection to cross, then they give up. So getting cycle times to a point where people are reporting that they feel comfortable to walk are all important indicators. How can we achieve those things? Well, the outputs that we might focus on are improving the sidewalks, making crossings more frequent, improving the network of bicycle lanes, improving street lighting, and calming the traffic. So indicators might be, what's the width of the sidewalks, and how long are the sidewalks? How many crossings per kilometre are there in place? How many cycle lanes and how wide are the cycle lanes? How many streetlights per kilometre are there? These are the sorts of outputs of your project, your Safe Street project, that you might really focus on, because you know that there's that causal chain of evidence that goes through the short-term changes, long-term changes, and final impact. And of course, the inputs that you might have in your project include like a master plan for your city, community engagement, getting the engagement of people who live in the community and their feedback about how the outputs might be shaped. And that's really what this workshop is going to focus in on a lot. The designs themselves and the designers, the data that you have, and of course, finance all plug into those things. So when you're doing this workshop, but also when you're thinking about safe streets, using this mechanism, thinking about the causal relationships between what you're building and the impacts that it has short-term and long-term is incredibly valuable. And it will help to guide you about where you might need to find more evidence, where you might need to find more data, or where you might need to revise your project in order to ensure that those impacts are going to flow through. So with that, I'll hand back to Abby, and we can get started in the workshop.
Thanks for that, Greg. So now we'll start with the workshop session, and I will give two sets of instructions because they're going to be a little bit different for the people in the room and different for our online audiences. So first, for all the people sitting here with us in the room, can I request the folks who have the chairs by the side to pull up the chairs and join some of the tables that are present, because the workshops will be happening on the tables. We would encourage anywhere between 7 to 8 people at least per table. So in case your table does not have too many people, feel free to join another table which may not have enough participants. We will be sharing some material around, and we can start with that. For our online audiences, we are now going to have some breakout rooms, and we would encourage all of you to join the breakout rooms. We're going to have our facilitators, Lucia, Monica, and Francisca, join one breakout room each, or if we're having 2 breakout rooms, we're just making 2 breakout rooms, and we would encourage you to join a room in each. Lucia will share with all of you a link to a mural board. It's a digital tool for the workshop, and we would encourage all of you to join as a visitor. You do not need to create an account. You do not need to log in. Just join in as a visitor, please. And we will shortly get started in about 5 minutes once everyone has organized themselves in their rooms. Thank you.
Are you there?
Sorry, I am. I'm not sure whether we're back in the main session or not, though.
Oh, okay. I'm Bruce Conahan from New Zealand, the Transportation Policy and Planning Manager at a provincial local authority on the east coast of the North Island in New Zealand. So sort of been around road safety and the like for a number of years. So that's sort of a brief overview of me.
Nice, thanks. Hi, Lucia. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Monica. Yeah, for sure. I'm supporting GDCI. I will be facilitating some of the rooms today to help folks dive into the boards for this session. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Lucia.
Thanks, Lucia. Sorry to.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Lucia, can you give a thumbs up if you can hear me?
I also hear a lot of echo, but yeah, I can hear you.
Now.
Still with echo?
Okay. I think we have an echo. Sorry, please give us 2 minutes to figure out the tech challenge. Let's. Another thumbs up. Lucia, can you hear us? Can you give a thumbs up?
Yes, I can hear you, Abby.
Is this better? Yes. I think it's slightly better. So we're going to try and start with this. Thank you for your patience, everyone. So we hope all of you can see the screen shared with all of you. Now we're going to start by talking about the introduction.
I wonder if there's someone in the room that's one of the. We have to think about it. But this is someone else's booth. They get them all.
Can you unmute?
I think the audio
Is this better?
good now. Oh, a little bit better, but still with feedback.
Is this better?
Yeah, that's much better.
All right, great. Thank you so much for all your patience, everyone. I think we're set to go. We're going to start with a short presentation. I'm going to invite my colleague Uditi Agarwal to first introduce to all of you about one of our projects that we recently completed in the city of Kuala Lumpur, which had several steps and stages to the project. And then I will come back in to quickly introduce the board game, because I can see that the audience, at least here in the room, has already started to engage with the tools on their tables. So we don't want to keep you away from the game for too long. So I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Uditi Agarwal.
Thanks, Abhi. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Uditi Agarwal from the Global Designing Cities Initiative. The next part of the workshop is to introduce the board game that everyone's seeing the material already on their tables. And the idea of the board game is to be able to help you all with some interim strategies and metrics that can support long-term change in our urban streets. So to talk about how we can use some of the interim strategies and metrics, I wanted to start by showing an example of a street transformation project that we recently completed in the city of Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, which employed a lot of the interim strategies that we talk about at GDCI. And this project is from a school street in Kuala Lumpur called the Now Kota School Street, where we recently did a redesign to make the streets safer for children, for their caregivers, and for all street users. So I'm sure everybody's already familiar with KL, but just to give a little bit of context, it's the capital and the largest city in Malaysia. It's got a population of almost 2 million people. And the mode share is what's interesting. About more than 75% people use personal transport to get to places in KL. So a lot of car dependence. The project that I'm talking about today is the school zone in the northeast of the city. It's called the Danau Kota, which is a set of 2 schools, primary and secondary school. And you can see some of the photographs from around the school itself, the streets around it, how people are using it, the children, their caregivers, how they access the street. And to understand the project extent, the space around the school itself, the kind of intersections and the kind of road network that exists around the schools. We then understood the traffic flow, the kind of movement of the vehicles, of the pedestrians, the entries and exits of the schools, the entries and exits of the residential areas around it, to really understand what the movement pattern is. And I'll talk about what the process of the project was through the implementation of it, starting from the selection of the site that I already spoke about, then to understand the context, to analyze it, and to really understand how people are using those school streets by collecting the right kind of metrics that I'll talk about also. Then moving on to the design of the project itself, which also is an iterative process and evolved over time. Then engaging with the community, different kinds of stakeholders, how we brought them into the process of the design itself. Then really trialing the design that we came up with together with the community through what we call a pop-up trial, which is a very simple, quick, effective sort of way to trial some of the ideas on the ground. So we did 2 versions of a pop-up trial. Then really taking the feedback from the users, from the community, to take that into what we call an interim project implementation, which uses slightly more permanent materials and remains slightly longer on the site itself. And you can really understand how people are feeling about the redesign. And then finally, and a very important part of the process is to understand to evaluate the project by really collecting metrics and understanding both quantitatively and qualitatively how the project is doing. And just to give a deeper sense of how this went about the process itself. So we want to understand who are the people using the street and where are they actually coming from. So there are all kinds of road users in a school zone project, from the pedestrians who are coming from near and far, different kinds, different ages and abilities of people accessing the school street. We really did some proper metrics collection around counting how many people, how many pedestrians at different times of the day were coming in to that space and using it from different intersections. Analyzing the site by understanding what kind of desire lines exist for pedestrians. So what are the paths that pedestrians really take to cross from one part of the site to the other? And they don't necessarily happen over the existing pedestrian crossings. They can happen in other places. Other kinds of users on the street, like the cyclists, again, different ages, abilities, were coming to the school street as well. And really understanding vehicular counts. So understanding how many types of personal motor vehicles are there, how many motorbikes accessing the school zone at different points through the day. Understanding parking needs. So there are, of course, the acute parking need in that school zone. A lot of people, as I said, use personal motor vehicles. So understanding where people are parking on designated versus undesignated spaces within that school zone as well. And then we went on to do a lot of community engagement, stakeholder engagement, to understand, firstly, how people get to the schools. So how to really develop what the design objectives for the project could be. So we understood 80% of school students actually live within walkable and cyclable distance from the school itself. But a lot of them, more than 70% of the school children, didn't think that their streets around the school were safe. Only 25% of the school children actually walked to the street, even though they lived within a walkable and cyclable area from the school. Only very few chose to actually walk, whereas the others came by cars or motorbikes. And then doing more detailed community engagements with different groups. So from the school children of both the schools, really understanding what they feel about this, what is it that makes the streets unsafe, what is it that they would like to change on the streets around their schools. Doing engagements with the adults, the caregivers, the community, the agencies that are involved in the project, to really define the vision what it is that we would like to see at the end of the project for the school street. And we came up with three main ideas. One, to make the street, of course, safe for kids to be able to walk to school and to be able to spend time and play on this on the street, for the street to feel healthy and pleasant and inviting, and for the street to become comfortable to live and commute and play in for everybody. And then we went deeper into the design of the street itself to understand what the existing site conditions look, the geometry of the street, and had four main design objectives. One, to make streets safer for children and for all road users. Second, to reduce the speed on the streets. Third, to increase the safe pedestrian crossings. And fourth, to reclaim space for pedestrians. So with that project vision and objectives, we then went into detailing the redesign of the streets themselves. So if you can see on your screen is a drone image of what the side street of the school looked like before the transformation, and to understand what kind of space, what kind of right-of-way was available. And then to propose a detailed redesign of the same street. So the geometry change included geometric correction, included reclaiming of existing unused public space, speed reduction through horizontal deflection, a strategy called chicanes, providing chicanes, improving the pedestrian experience itself by extending the sidewalks, providing better pedestrian crossings at places where people desired those, dedicated facilities for drop-off and pickup because it was a school street, and also creating a plaza with all of that reclaimed space to make it for public use. And then we went on and did the pop-up trial, as I was saying, which was basically a very cheap and effective way of trialing the design on the ground, just using very simple materials such as cones and chalk and some paint. We went and drew the geometry on the site itself and really tried to see how people have started to use it. So you can see immediately the moment we painted the pedestrian crossings, the children started to use those. The extra space that was taken out was used by pedestrians in a more safe way. We painted the crossing, which at the intersection, and extended the curbs, which reduced the crossing distance immediately. And then this is what the street looked like after the first pop-up. This was a quick overnight pop-up, and then an image from the morning thereafter. And then after a couple of weeks or so, we got the feedback, we understood what people wanted, and trialed a slight change in the design itself to include some more parking spaces that we saw people were really wanting, and tried a slightly different geometry a few weeks later. And then went on to do what we call the interim transformation. And then you can see through what we called a volunteers day, we invited the community, we invited children, we invited people from different organizations to come help us to transform the street through the interim. So we used paints, bright colored paints, we used bollards to actually, we used planters, signage to transform the street at that time. And you can see some images of how that interim transformation worked. These are the contractors that helped us on site, and some glimpses of what the street looked like post the interim transformation. And we can see different street users actually getting the space that they deserve in that on that street itself. You could see cyclists cycling in a more protected way. Children started to use the space better. The public space was completely activated where they didn't have any space earlier. We saw children coming and playing and spending a lot more time there. And then the most important part of it, which was the evaluation of the project and really understanding what the interim did for the community. So we collected metrics before the transformation, during, as well as after. And just to share with you all before I end what it looked like. So baseline metrics around the geometry itself. So about 140 meters of the street length was transformed. We saw a 35% speed reduction in motorcycle speeds, which of course is a direct implication of improvement in road safety. We saw all kinds of vehicular speeds go down. So the highest speeds before the intervention were 40 kilometers an hour, went down to about 23. After the interim transformation, we saw an over 50% increase in the pedestrian area that was provided on the school street. 1,300 square meters of reclaimed pedestrian area, and 70% reduction in crossing distances. And then we went back and did more surveys with the students to understand how, if they feel safer on the street, what they like about the streets, what it is that they would like to continue into a capital construction, a more permanent project. And just ending my presentation with some shots of what the street looked like before and after. So you can see the intersection, which is a wide open intersection without any markings, with the pedestrian crossing, with the curb extensions, increase in pedestrian space on the corners. And you can see the street itself, how it was before to how it was after, with the sidewalk extensions, with the provision of the cycle lanes, with the signage, with the bulb outs. And just some more drone images of what the street looked before and after. So this is just an example of how a project was implemented in Kuala Lumpur. There's lots of other ways to do it. We just want to show the process, and then I'll invite, thank you. I'll invite Abhi back to talk about the game and how we can use some of these in that.
Thanks, Aditi, for getting us all excited with that wonderful presentation of a recent project completed. The big takeaways from it, of course, are the project itself, but the process, where there were lots of different stakeholders involved. There were repeated stakeholder engagements, repeated metrics collection, repeated design iterations, and just proof that not one process can be followed in all parts of the world. And the idea behind today's game is for all of you to immerse yourselves into a scenario. Let's assume each of you are working on one project, which you are going to do an interim trial of in the next few months, which will be impacting long-term change. And what will be the process that you as different stakeholders would like to define through this? And that's the objective of the game. I'm going to talk about some of the material on it, but some of the questions that we want each of you to think about is, what does the process for implementing interim street transformations look like? When is the best time to order materials, hold a community engagement session, or develop a maintenance strategy? And which are some of the most relevant metrics to evaluate your project that you are thinking about? So we will have some limited time today and some more presentations to help as prompts, but I'm going to jump into briefing all of you with the material so that you can start playing the game shortly. So there's a large board, and even for the people in the breakout rooms, when you go back into the mural board, you'll see this large board, which is the gameplay board. You have these instruction pamphlets. Each table should have 2 of them, which have the instructions for the game, as well as some metrics that you can collect, almost like a cheat sheet for you to refer to. And finally, a scenario. So some of you have a plaza scenario, and some of you have a corridor transformation scenario sheet given to you. The fun part in each of your tables should be a deck of playing cards. Playing cards that look a little bit different, but very colorful and fun. And they fall into 4 main categories. The 4 categories are planning and design. The yellow ones are around procurement and logistics. The green ones are around outreach and programming. And the purple ones are around metrics and evaluation. And the idea is that there are enough different variations of each of these steps that need to be taken into account when you're designing the entire project. And so we encourage you to place those across the different timelines to see where they fit in. Another important piece to note is the 6 cards, which is the challenges deck. The challenges deck is basically 6 different stakeholders, and you can pick 1 or maximum 2 stakeholders who could pose challenges to your project. And you need to begin by selecting that. And then you, at every different stage when you're placing the card, it will be your responsibility to think, what would that challenger say? How would they react? When do they need to be brought in to the workspace? So you start by placing cards on the deck. What we would encourage is each of you to pick 3 to 4 cards each and start populating them on different parts of the timeline, and then come together as a group to start interacting, discussing, and debating what works and what doesn't. Before you do that, you should understand your site and your key stakeholders. So each of you has a site. You should read that and understand the project that you might be working on. So these are the 2 street scenarios. And then identify your stakeholder. Identify which of these stakeholders are you going to work with as your naysayers, or as the people who you need to convert during your design process. So it could be something like a politician, it could be a journalist, it could be an advocate, or many others. Then you'll start looking at the different process timeline, which is before the project, the lead up to the project, the implementation of the project. And don't forget that your responsibility continues even after the project. And hence the timeline extends beyond that, because we need to be thinking about the aftermath as well. And you can start to think about some things which are missing. So we've got some wild cards or blank cards as well, where you can write down a process that is not existing in the deck, which might be unique to your context and your city that you work in. And finally, it will be about, so you start placing these cards across the process until your board starts to get full. You will see that some of them will be processes that will have to run in parallel, and which is why we have space for more than 1 card to exist next to each other. And then you finally start to think about the metrics. So you start to identify which are the metrics that will be the best used to define the success of your project, to scale up for long-term and permanent change. And you can use the metrics cheat sheet for that. At the end, 1 or maximum 2 people from each group will be requested for a quick report back. And you only need to report back on 3 pieces. What was the biggest challenge that you faced as a group? What was the biggest opportunity you saw? And last, what was the biggest disagreement that you had amongst your team members? So we're going to keep them quick and brief. These red dots that you see on the sheet are for marks that you will make with a pen to say, where have you engaged your challenger? Where have you engaged your stakeholder? Lucia, Francisca, and Monica will be helping the online groups. Uditi, myself, Greg, Dave, we will be moving around and working with all of you in person. But now we're going to pause here. We encourage you to go back into your breakout rooms for the online folks. And we're going to take about 20 minutes for the first session of gameplay. We're going to be moving around and helping you. But please remember, while you're doing all of these tasks, remember to have fun, and we'll reconvene again in 20 minutes for another presentation. Thank you.
ಹಲೋ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಸೌಂಡ್ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದೆಯಾ? ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಕೇಳ್ದೆ. ಹಾ ಹಾ ನೀವ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರೋದು ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದೆ.
ಅವರು ಸ್ಟಾಪ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಮೀಟಿಂಗ್.
ಅವರು ಆಡಿಯೋ ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ.
ಅವರೇ ಮಾಡಿದಾರ.
ಇವಾಗ ಅರವಿಂದ್ ಮಾತಾಡೋದು ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತೀನಿ.
ಇಲ್ಲ ಸರ್, ಅವ್ರದ್ದು ಇದು ಸ್ಟಾಪ್ ಆಗಿದೆ ಮೀಟಿಂಗ್ ಸರ್. ಪ್ರೆಸೆಂಟೇಷನ್ ಸ್ಟಾಪ್ ಆಗಿದೆ. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನಾಗರಾಜ್ ಚೆಕ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ.
ಅವರು ರಿಹರ್ಸಲ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂತ ಇದಾರೆ ಏನು?
ಒಟ್ಟ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿದೆ ಮೀಟಿಂಗ್.
ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿದೆ. ಸೌಂಡ್ ಬರ್ತಾರ ಅಂತಲ್ಲ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಅರವಿಂದ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿನ ಮಾತಾಡೋದು.
ಏನಂದ್ರೆ
ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತದೆ.
ಕೈಯದಪ್ಪ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ
ಸರ್
ಕಾಂಟ್ ಏರಿ ಅಂತ.
ಅದೆಲ್ಲ ಸರ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿಂದ ಅರವಿಂದ್ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರು. ಅವ್ರು ಇನ್ನೂ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿಲ್ಲ ಮೀಟಿಂಗ್.
ಯಾರು ಇವ್ರು ಇನ್ನು ಮೀಟ್
ಅವ್ರು ಆಡಿಯೋ
ಅವ್ರು ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂತ
ಅವ್ರು ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂತ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ.
ಅದೇ 1:30 ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ ಅಂತ ನಾನು ಹೇಳಿ. ಮೀಟಿಂಗ್ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತೀರಾ?
ಸರ್ ಮೀಟಿಂಗ್ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿದೆ ಸರ್, ಬಟ್ ಇವರು ಯೂಸರ್ಸ್ ಯಾರು ಬಂದಿಲ್ಲ ಸರ್. PPT ಮಾತ್ರ ಹಾಕಿದ್ದಾರೆ.
All right. Hi, everyone. If we can request all of you to please take your seats and pause back. You're all going to get a lot more time to play the game. This was only round one. You're going to get more time. Trust me. Trust me, the presentation will help. And I apologize for the online rooms that I know one of the rooms didn't have the link to the mural board. We will make sure that before you go back into your breakout room, you have your links with you. So apologies for that. But now I'm going to invite Uditi back on stage to share with all of us a few design recommendations or few design principles from the Global Street Design Guide that we encourage all of you to think about when designing your streets. And immediately after Uditi's presentation, we're going to pass it over to Monica from iRAP to share a little bit about the CycleRAP tools, which can help evaluate and assess these infrastructure projects across different stages and life cycle of the project planning. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Uditi.
Hi, everyone. Again, sorry to break up the flow of the game, but we'll allow you all to do it again very soon. But I wanted to come in the middle and talk about how we can start to design safe and sustainable streets. So slightly technical presentation on how we can look at street design from the perspective of different road users. So just to take a step back, Global Designing Cities Initiative was launched 10 years ago in 2014 as a nonprofit in New York City. And one of the first steps that we took at GDCI was to develop the Global Street Design Guide, which is a guide that helps people, leaders, communities, technicians, helps them reimagine the streets that they're working on. And I think there's also a copy of the GSDG in the room somewhere in case anyone's interested in having a look at the physical copy. But the GSDG has been translated over the years into many different languages for use across the globe. And it's been endorsed by more than 100 cities and organizations across the world as well. So many cities and organizations have agreed to use the principles that have been written in the Global Street Design Guide. So the main principle of the GSDG is actually to relook at the traditional hierarchy of street design. So when we traditionally look at street design, our streets have been designed to keep motor vehicles and cars as priority and not so much priority given to the vulnerable road users who are the pedestrians and the cyclists. So the GSDG recommends flipping that hierarchy on its head completely and prioritizing the most vulnerable users who are our pedestrians, our cyclists, our elderly, our children, putting them at the top when we're thinking of redesigning our streets, and then looking at the other road users such as transit, such as people doing business, and then the private motor vehicles. So we recommend a new approach to street design altogether, which looks at both people as well as the place. So not just the context, but also the people using our streets in order to do street design so that we can lead to more healthy, safe streets, more livable streets, which improve the quality of life of the users. So talking a little bit about designing for place, how we can we do that in any case, looking at our built environment, looking at the natural environment that the streets are in, looking at the social and cultural environment, as well as the economic environment that the streets are in. So considering different scales of considerations from the demographics to the density of our urban environments, the history and culture, the different uses and the destinations, the street networks, etc. But also the smaller scale considerations of each street. So the kind of street activity that exists on those, the furniture, the scale of the street itself, the geometry, the right of way, the kind of activity that's taking place at the ground level, the kind of mode share that exists in the city, the different kinds of climatic considerations, etc. But what I want to focus on in my presentation is how we can start to design for people, for the users of the streets themselves, and how we can start looking at all different street users. So at GDCI, we categorize street users into 6 main categories, starting from the most vulnerable, who are the pedestrians. Second are the cyclists on our streets. Third, the transit riders. Fourth, the motorists. Fifth, the freight operators and the service providers. And also, sixth, the people doing business. We must not forget, though, especially in Asian cities and our streets, we see a lot of people doing business on our streets as well. So I'll go into each of the categories very briefly to talk about how we can use different elements, different street design toolkits to be able to design to include all these street users. So starting with designing for pedestrians. We know pedestrians on our streets come in different shapes and sizes, different abilities and different ages. So you can see from the able-bodied person might be a specific size, but children require a different kind of physical space versus people with some special needs have different requirements on the streets. We see, we recommend that streets are designed keeping the person on a wheelchair in mind, which that usually takes a space about 1.8 meters in width. So if we design for a wheelchair, we will design for all street users as well. Pedestrians also walk at very different speeds. So we can't assume all pedestrians are walking at the same speed, from people in a wheelchair who could be slower to people running on the street. They'll have different speeds. So we should accommodate our streets for those. We have different elements that we recommend when we're looking at street design, a toolkit of different elements that can be used to make streets safer for pedestrians. Starting from providing sidewalks, the right kind of sidewalks, to pedestrian crossings, to refuge islands, curb extensions, and the works. So starting with how we can design our sidewalks correctly. And we can look at this. All streets have different rights of way and different geometries. But we must make our sidewalks such that they can accommodate the different uses that happen on the sidewalks themselves. So for example, in a commercial street, there could be activity happening in front of shops, so the frontage zone of shops. And then there might be street furniture and lighting that requires its own space, and then some buffer space as well. But what's important is to maintain a clear path, a minimum clear path where people can walk of about 1.8 to 2.4 meters at all costs. Different streets have different geometries, as I was saying, and then sidewalks should be designed keeping those contexts and geometries in mind. So starting from residential streets, which could be narrower and might not require all the different zones in a sidewalk, to the larger commercial streets, which might have the buffer zone, the frontage zone, and the clear paths. So designing our sidewalks to the context of the street is very important. Then another element that is very important in street design is accessibility, and like providing the right kind of accessibility ramps on our streets so that they become usable by all. So the right geometry of accessibility ramps at mid-block crossings, at the intersections, at the corners, to ensure that people of all abilities are able to access our streets. So you can see some images of how streets are designed, and they might have sidewalks, but they might not actually be accessible to all just by the geometry and the ramps that are not present. Another element that's very important is pedestrian crossings. So pedestrian crossings, we recommend should be safe and accessible, of course, but also should be provided at the right places, at the right intervals. So we recommend every 80 to 100 meters, there should be a pedestrian crossing that's accessible, and there should be one at all legs of an intersection to ensure that it's a connected walkable network. We see all over Asian cities now more and more pedestrian bridges, footover bridges are getting constructed. which unfortunately unnecessarily increase our walking distances by a lot. They take up a lot of the space of the sidewalk itself, and they cost a heavy amount also. So a lot of city investment goes into foot-over bridges. So we recommend that all pedestrian crossings should be at grade. And I'll tell you why. The moment you see a pedestrian a foot-over bridge, you'll see that the distance that you have to cross as a pedestrian goes up by a lot. So the same street with a foot-over bridge has a distance of about 240 meters for a pedestrian to cross. So an able-bodied person walking at a good speed might take 4 minutes to cross, but a person with a special need or walking stick will, the same distance will take about 4 times the amount of time to cross the same street. Whereas if that street had an at-grade crossing, the distance is reduced drastically, but also the time to cross is a lot lesser. Crossings should also not be very far apart, should never be more than 200 meters apart, because the moment a person takes too long to access a crossing, you will see that they start to cross the street where it's convenient and comfortable in a more direct way. So as Abhi was saying earlier, the responsibility is on us, the designers, to design the system, not the pedestrian. Some more street elements like the pedestrian refuge island is one of the ways to make our streets safer. A refuge island is an element that allows a 2-stage crossing instead of 1, especially in streets which are very wide and very high speed. We recommend that any street that's more than 3 lanes to cross should have a refuge island, which allows people to stop, pause in between before crossing to the other end. So these also come in different geometries and are recommended in different ways depending on the context of the street. So there could be standalone refuge islands. They could be part of the median, could be a part of a cut through in the median as well. But what's important is to ensure that the width of the refuge island is such that a wheelchair, a person with all abilities can use those. So a minimum of 1.8 meters. Another element, I'm sorry, I'm going very quick on this, but I want to cover a few different elements for you all to start thinking about. Another one is what we call curb extensions. These are extensions of the curbside which help reduce crossing distances and increase and reduce the exposure of the most vulnerable to motor vehicles and fast moving vehicles. It helps improve mutual visibility and also increases the amount of public space on our streets. So you can see, again, curb extensions can be designed in different ways as bulb outs, as corner extensions and alignments, as well as in some cases, slip lane removals to give that space back as curb extensions. Now moving on to the next type of street user, that's the cyclist, and how we can design our streets keeping cyclists in mind. Again, cyclists come in different sizes, shapes, speeds. You can see from an able-bodied professional cyclist to families cycling together, as well as rickshaws that we see a lot of in our cities as well. And they all move at different speeds on our streets, and that must be accommodated for. So the idea is to start rethinking the cyclist. It's not always a professional cyclist with all the gear who's able to move at any condition on a street. But actually, the cyclists can be anybody, people with all ages and abilities, from children to the elderly, as well as families who might want to move around cities on their cycles. And streets should be able to accommodate for all of those. So our cycle facilities should be designed that way as well. We must ensure that cycle lanes have the right kind of geometry, the right access, the right network, and made in a safe way that people are encouraged to cycle safely in the cities. So having the right curb zone, the cycle lane itself, as well as the buffer zone. Again, depending on the street and the speed at which the street functions, cycle facilities can be designed in many different ways. So for streets that are less than 30 kilometers an hour or are shared streets, the cycle facility itself can be shared with other users depending on how the movement is. For streets that are operating at slightly higher speeds, over 30 kilometers an hour, we recommend having protected cycle facilities. So protected unidirectional or bidirectional cycle lanes or cycle tracks, sometimes raised cycle tracks as well, with a buffer to protect from moving vehicles and parked vehicles that might open and close their doors. And of course, for higher speeds and wider streets, there can be different forms of cycle lanes, but it's important to contextualize the cycle facilities to make them usable and safe. So showing some examples of cycle tracks that have been implemented across the globe in different contexts. This is an image from Bogota of how a protected cycle track was implemented on a street. Example from Canada, where again, a protected cycle track was implemented on a street with a buffer, green buffer space. Some more examples from New York City and from Paris, where a raised cycle track has been implemented. And then streets like this, which are narrower and slower, which can be used as cycle streets themselves. So the space can be shared. And a different material is used to make streets safer for all. And then sometimes we can implement contraflow cycle lanes on streets that are not as wide and have a protected cycle lane on the contraflow direction, as well as shared space for the same direction. And then moving on to how we can start thinking about transit users and how streets can be designed for those. Again, transit also comes in various shapes and sizes. We see in our cities all forms of mini buses and vans and larger buses and all kinds of transit ways that are used. And then again, the speed at which they function varies also. So how we can start looking at collective transit and transit facilities for those different types of transit users in terms of how dedicated rights of way can be dedicated to bus lanes in order to be able to move more people. As Abhi was showing earlier in the day, the moment a dedicated bus lane is implemented on a street, we can start to see a lot more users being moved in the same amount of time. So just showing how that actually works. If you see a bus lane that's dedicated on a street versus in mixed traffic, you can see in mixed traffic, a bus might be able to carry about 1,000 people per hour. But if the same street has a dedicated bus lane, you'll be able to carry about 4 to 6 times the number of people in the same amount of time. So I'm going to move a little bit quickly. I know I might be out of time, just to show how different geometries of bus lanes can be implemented and some examples of how transit ways are implemented across the globe. Center and running transit ways, transit malls in a lot of cities. And then moving to designing for motorists, how we can look at our motorists, again, being of different shapes and sizes and different speeds, moving in on our streets. But the key idea with designing for motorists is to reduce speeds and bring them to safe speeds on our streets, so it becomes usable by all. And there are many strategies that we can implement to start to reduce speeds on our streets, from narrowing vehicle lanes to reallocating the space to the right kind of user, from horizontal and vertical deflection that we can use to reduce speeds, sharing of streets, and then having other protected elements. Sorry. Just showing an example of how a street can be reimagined to reallocate the space. So if you see this right-of-way, which is primarily designed for cars, only can be reimagined differently to allow for movement of all users. So the same space can be redistributed, giving space to different users. And why do we talk about narrowing lanes? I spoke about narrowing lanes. Why is that important? Narrower lanes are safer, number one. They encourage lower speeds, but they also carry more vehicles, if not the same amount. So showing an example of just how space reallocation can reduce the speed, the functional speed of a street. This is an example which before a project was 50 kilometers an hour, and the same street reimagined, redesigned, brought down the operational speed to 30 kilometers an hour just by lane narrowing. So the GSDG has many different elements which we can talk about through the rest of the workshop on how they can be used on our streets. Just going to move quickly through the toolkit of traffic calming measures that we suggest: pedestrian crossings to refuge islands that I spoke about already, pedestrian plazas and parklets that can be used as tools for traffic calming, tightening turning radii that helps reduce turning speeds, curb extensions which narrow down streets at intersections to bring down speeds as well, and different forms of horizontal and vertical deflection to reduce speeds. And then quickly moving on to the last two kinds of users, the designing for how we can design for freight and service providers. We know on our streets, there's lots of larger vehicles as well. We talk about the smaller vehicles, but there's also large trucks and service providers and freight operators that ply on our streets as well. And we should think about those. But not every street needs to accommodate freight vehicles. It depends on the context in which streets actually have routes that have larger vehicles on them, and only those ones should be designed to accommodate for that kind of size of vehicles. We can also see the same street can function. Lots of times we have resistance saying larger vehicles might not be able to use the street if we do curb extensions or bulb outs, but with simple design changes, we can allow for all vehicles to use those streets. And then lastly, people doing business, how we can design for keeping them in mind as well. They come, again, in various dimensions, various sizes, people using kiosks to carts, people sitting outside restaurants. They use a lot of the space on our streets as well and should be included in our design thinking. So we can see, depending on the need of the street itself, we can provide those as commercial extensions on the sidewalk itself. There's vendors on the sidewalks which should have the dedicated space as well as different zones that we can provide for street vending activities. So again, there's different elements such as electricity and lighting and waste management and storage that needs to be thought about when we're designing space for people doing business. And the GSDG recommends how we can have some, we can suggest the kind of buffers, the kind of spaces that can be used for kiosks and street vending on our sidewalks. But I just want to end by saying we must always, we've looked at lots of different users, but we must always design streets that put people first. Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to now invite Monica from iRAP, who's joining us online. And she's got another presentation for us. Monica, are you able to hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? I'm also going to share my screen.
We can't hear you yet.
Whether... Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Excellent. That's good.
We're just trying to get your presentation up on the screen.
Great, thank you. If you could let me know when it's there. Oh yes, I can see it. That's good. Okay, so while that's going to full screen, I'll introduce myself. My name is Monica Olislagas. I'm the Global Innovation Manager and City Specialist at iRAP. I'm joining you today from the Netherlands. It's the morning still here. But I have actually, I'm Australian. I've spent many years living in Asia, and it's certainly a bit of a passion of mine. And I really love the region. I wanted to start with a quote. I was a little bit inspired by the template provided me, saying you should provide a quote, gets people thinking. So this is, the one I chose is from Anna Niska, who works at VTI Sweden. Sweden's the birthplace of Vision Zero. And I was sitting in a workshop with her probably a couple of years ago now, and she identified cyclists as being the biggest challenge they now have for Vision Zero. And it's not just Sweden. We know post-COVID, injuries are going up, cyclist injuries specifically, but also pedestrian injuries and fatalities are increasing all over the globe. You can see there on the left that's a headline from the US. Here in the Netherlands, which has very, very good cycling, lots of people cycle, you can also see that in 2022, there was the highest number of transport-related deaths and serious injuries in the last 10 years. And that increase has been predominantly driven by bicyclists that you can see as the bottom bar in the darkest blue. And there are lots of reasons why this is happening. There are lots of different things in the mix. I mean, COVID really changed how people are moving about and they're commuting. Some of those changes are now going back, where people are returning to the office or returning to ways that they were traveling before. But we have lots of great options when it comes to mobility. We've got electric bikes. There is more deliveries being made. There are larger and heavier bikes as people swap their car for cargo bikes here in Europe, but also in Asia. There's so many more delivery services and larger freight deliveries being made by these sorts of bikes. You've got demographic changes. This is affecting the world over. People are getting older on average, particularly in Asia and Europe, Australia also. So these are some of the challenges that people want to stay mobile for longer, but it means that we have more elderly people on our roads. We've got new sharing apps, and because people are increasingly working in food delivery services, we also have a change of the time of day when people are actually cycling, so more people cycling at night. Quickly, why is safe cycling so important? Safety is the absolute crux of getting people cycling. If you don't have safety, you don't choose to hop on your bike. There's so many reasons why we want people to cycle. It's a clean, cheap, and healthy way to go. So this is not only great for individuals because it's affordable and it means that they live a healthier life, but it's also really good for society and that it reduces health costs and infrastructure costs as well. As I said, safety is central to people choosing to ride. And when you're faced with cities with congestion or overcrowded public transport or car parking problems or whatever the challenge is, it can really be solved by getting more people on bikes. As I mentioned before, there's a growing delivery and sharing economy. Consumers benefit from that, but it also provides much needed jobs. And one of my favorite things about it is it's inclusive. You do not need a license. You do not need to own a car. You do not need to be able to afford one. You do not need to be able to pass a driving test or to maintain a license into old age. You can partake in cycling at any age, at any ability. Here in the Netherlands, you see a lot of people with adapted wheelchairs, which means that if they have a wheelchair, that they can clip on a device on the front of their wheelchair, and that turns it into a bicycle. This is a chart that I think speaks volumes. The yellow bars are the amount spent per person on cycling infrastructure. The green bar, the line down there, is how many people actually travel by bicycle. And then the blue bars are how many cyclists are killed. And you can see there is a really direct correlation between cycling investment and safety. And this is really, really important. We need to be thinking about the sort of investment, what sort of infrastructure we're building in our cities, what sort of design our streets have to encourage people to ride, but also to keep them safe. So what's standing in the way? And this is where I don't want to stand between you and the game for too much longer, and just to think about cycling metrics. How do we measure safety for cyclists? It's a really, really challenging one, because even in the countries with the most developed cycling systems, there's chronic underreporting of crashes. It is really hard for cities to know where crashes are happening, how they're happening, why they're happening. Because when somebody falls off their bicycle, in some cases, if it involves a direct collision between a vehicle and a bicyclist, then sometimes there's a police report made. But if that person falls off their bicycle or hits something, or there's another kind of crash, even if they're trying to avoid a vehicle, often if they fall off the bicycle, even if they are seriously injured and taken away in an ambulance to a hospital, that is not reported in the traditional crash report systems. And so you end up with a lot of people in hospitals, or even having died, without that making it into the official crash reports. And international studies, so the statistics from the top box there, 60 to 90% of hospitalizations from cycling crashes and 5 to 30% of deaths are not reported in the crash report system. And that comes from a study of 12 countries. And so there is a real lack of awareness, but also then a lack of tools as to how to address the problem. And so this is where I get to CycleRAP, because this is something that we've created here at iRAP. For those of you who know us, and I think most of you do, we are a global NGO, and we're dedicated to improving, reducing, I should say, road fatalities and injuries worldwide. And we make tools that can be used to help understand these metrics and measure. So CycleRAP's now already been applied in major projects in over 10 countries globally. They're there on the map, but many more cities have been using it on small sections so far to understand what the safety challenges are and how to address them. So how it works, you can see here a map of Vienna. It identifies high-risk locations. It can be applied anywhere on any kind of infrastructure. It could be if you have kids riding to school on sidewalks, you can use it on the sidewalk. If you have people using the street, you can use it on the street, any kind of infrastructure. It can be used independently or in conjunction with other tools or data. And it uses risk ratings to suggest safety treatment. So not only does it tell you where your risk is high, but also what you can be doing about it. Here you can see a risk worm. So VD stands for a vehicle-bicycle conflict, and you can see across the length of this where you have peaks in different types of risk. And so it means that you can identify those red spots on the line and go and see what the problem is, and the model will also help you address it. Importantly, it doesn't just look at vehicle-bicycle risk. And as I said before, this only makes up actually a small proportion of people getting hospitalized. It still makes up the majority of fatalities though. But it also looks at conflicts between bicycles and other light mobility vehicles. This is becoming increasingly important as we have lots of different kinds of bicyclists. I use the word very generally, but it could include e-scooters. It could be including cargo vehicles to make deliveries, e-powered, non-powered, etc. Conflicts with pedestrians is also a really interesting one, particularly in some countries where the typical kind of bicycle infrastructure being built is always a shared path. In other places, there's just lots of pedestrians, so you really have to be thinking about that design as well, not to be piling everyone into the same small space and expecting it to be safe, because it's not. And then also things that cause safety issues that are not other road users, and this could be just the poor design of the infrastructure that is causing the crashes. And so CycleRAP can be used and the metrics from it can be used in several different things. Here's an example of a street design that has been done in a traffic simulation tool by PTV. So this street, and I should have included the before photo, but it essentially had no bicycling infrastructure on it. And then they were able to take in account the redesign and evaluate using CycleRAP how what the safety benefit was of introducing this new off-road path. So as I said, it can be used throughout the street design process, right from the concept to the planning to the design and the evaluation. And it's not only a decision-making tool, but it's also a really effective communication tool. And I'll quickly show you why. So this is our iRAP demonstrator. You can try out the model for yourself for free online. It's just you can see the web address at the top there. And it's available in multiple languages. And then you can use it to evaluate different ones. And I've taken a couple of pictures I just had and done a quick assessment of them this morning to demonstrate. I noticed that I tend to take photos of very nice paths. So here you get some very low risk paths, but this one is from Japan. So you can see it's an off-road path. You can see here the single bicycle crash is actually a medium risk. And the reason for that is there is a bollard in the site and there's no street lighting. So someone using this at night may not see that bollard in the way and it could cause a crash. But otherwise a very nice off-road path. You've got, this is taken in Washington on-road bike lane. So you can see here that it's again a nice quality path. We've got paths in Japan, again, looking at very sort of mixed use pathways where you do have sidewalks, but there's a lot of pedestrians on the path itself. This one's taken in China, in Shanghai, where this was a new path that was built in a university district. And so what you can see from the scores is that all of these great examples of safe cycling infrastructure, you can demonstrate that through the use of the metrics this tool provides. This one's from a different project in Sao Paulo. You could see in this case, it's right next to a road lane with very little between the road lane protecting the bicyclists. And so in that case, we had a high vehicle bicycle risk. And the suggested treatments that the model came up with for this one was to install street lighting, to control the speed of vehicles and to install traffic calming as well. Okay, and with that, I will leave you with it and enjoy the rest of your game.
Thank you so much, Uditi and Monica, for those presentations, just to get us thinking further into the kind of nuances we need to be designing for, and some of the tools available, like iRAP and the Global Street Design Guide, which can help us through these design processes. Now we're going to go back to the gameplay. So for those of you online, please choose to go back to your breakout rooms, 1 or 2. And for those of you over here in the room, please get back to your boards and games. Apologies for interrupting earlier. We're going to take 25 minutes more for the gameplay. This is also the time when you can choose to go out and get some coffee. The organizers have been very kind to allow you to bring your coffee into the room. So please do that, take a break, and we will reconvene for one last short presentation before the final round of gameplay in 25 minutes. Thank you. All right, welcome back, everyone. Great to see all the excitement and conversations happening on all the tables. And hopefully even the online rooms work through the technical glitches and have managed to start playing the game. Can I request everyone to please take their seats for another 10 minutes? Thank you, everyone. If we can have all of you looking at the screen, please. So we know that all of you have had a chance to look at the different cards to play out different scenarios for your project. And now what I'm going to talk about is give you a few ideas and examples of how we at GDCI have had the opportunity to work with city governments in different parts of the world around stakeholder engagement and project evaluation. We think that some of the prompts may ask you to redo some of your process pieces, move some of those steps around, and come up with your final process strategies. Starting with community engagement, it's important that we understand why is community engagement important. It's important to make sure that different stakeholders and groups feel included, that they get a chance to participate in their street design project. And in order to get people and agencies feel responsible for the project themselves. And most importantly, it is important for long-term impact. And this can be done through several different formats of stakeholder engagement, such as focus groups, structured interviews, workshops, as well as fun and hands-on activities. And these different tools can be used to build trust with the stakeholders and the road users who will be using these projects every single day. It is to share information with the residents, with the visitors, as well as with the stakeholders who are funding the project, maintaining the project, and building the project. It's a chance to connect, to share, and to update. And this can be done with different stakeholder groups. I know many of you have already started to identify some of them, such as the local politicians, the authorities. Sometimes some projects also have regional and national authorities at play. We know many times you have highways going through the city of your center of your city. Professionals and researchers, academics, as well as activist groups and advocates, and the local communities who are living there. And this can be done in a step-by-step process, starting with analysis, which is important to make sure that the project solutions are contextualized and they are mapping each of the local stakeholders at play. This can include children, different genders, different communities and ethnicities in the room. Then it's about setting the vision. Setting the vision to prioritize what are the different pieces and objectives for each project. Is it about safety, or is it about air quality and access at another time? And this can be done through simple tools such as community suggestion boxes, community ideas, and different forums. Getting to the planning and concept stage, it's important not just to plan in isolation, but to continue to share and get feedback from these stakeholders. That is what makes the planning process more iterative over time. You can also source design ideas. We have seen that many times working with the most unobvious stakeholder groups gives you the best design ideas for that location. And eventually keep refining the project plan. It's also important that you don't only want the people who say yes in the room, but the opposition should be in the room when planning as well, because they can often play the devil's advocate role They can push you to rethink your assumptions and come up with innovative solutions that truly are agreeable to all. And finally, coming to implementation, some of the toughest parts for project, it's important to build the support, but build the ownership, because we may fund or build a project, but we don't live there. It's the local authorities and the local people who need to own it. And the best way to do it is to acknowledge contribution, acknowledge and celebrate the role of every individual in your project who has made it possible. This is a simple example where in Santiago, Chile, there was a My Route to School engagement, and every child and every family who participated in it eventually got a little kit to celebrate their participation. We get messages like this, where people love their community engagement process and keep asking if these things were to happen again. And mostly this happens when we engage with children, because the children rarely get a say on their streets and how it should be designed. But as I spoke about earlier, the process doesn't stop here. It continues beyond the implementation, where it is our responsibility to share the metrics and the insights, to receive feedback, and change minds and change policies. And these are just some pictures with different stakeholders, different community groups who've come together in parts of the world to celebrate these projects and make them long-term. So some of the key takeaways are that community engagement strengthens projects and supports implementation. It can be very cost-effective and it can be done very, very quickly. It needs to happen at all phases of a project. It cannot just happen at one, or it should not. And engagement should not only be seen as hindrances to projects. So we encourage all of you to start now doing this at whatever stage is the project on which you are working on. But as you involve community groups, evaluating the project becomes a greater responsibility. A guide which is passing around is the Evaluating Street Transformations booklet, which is again a free download and available on our website. And that starts to talk about the different types of data which we can reach out to support our projects. And we need to start thinking about what are the different possibilities, and then what do we need to measure? Because this is how we have been measuring success in our cities, with the kilometers of highways, number of bridges, number of parking spots, and new roads and lanes that we have built. But it's time we shift how we measure success on our streets around access and mobility, public health, economic and environmental sustainability, quality of life, and very importantly, equality. It's time we shift away from measuring only these guys to measuring all of them and making these inclusive and equitable. Because meaningful metrics can help cities to expand upon their data collection practices and take into account new user groups who we have never considered before. It can show the impact of the money invested and help scale them up. It can allow you to test new materials and ideas and include them into your city's material library. I know we just had a few folks from the Manila DOT join us in the room, and these can be great ways to expand the material library in your city, encourage fairer conversations to make sure all groups are represented, and most importantly, build evidence for future. And what this depends upon is the project objective that we need to define. So we need to define our project objectives first, which will help us define the metrics which we need to collect. In turn, build a story or tell the story, and then use that to keep reinforming this project and improving this as we go along. So I'll give one example of downtown Fortaleza in Brazil, where this project and the story and narrative which was built around it. This was the downtown of Fortaleza, where 91 pedestrians were killed in one single year on this primary corridor of the city. That was the problem being addressed, and 70% more prevalent in the downtown than any other part of the city, affecting the pedestrians. The street looked like this, with overcrowded sidewalks and high-speeding vehicles. And so the objective was to improve the pedestrian safety conditions. So the choice of indicators about which metrics will help show the greatest impact. And so from all these different metrics, you need to choose and pick which are the ones which are most strategic for your project. We started with metric user counts, and we saw that 75% of the users were pedestrians. But when we started to measure the right of way, we saw that most of the space was given to cars. 2/3 of the road space given to 10% of the road user. And that was something we needed to change. We saw that people walking on the roadway, which means pedestrians exposed to the risk of being hit by a moving vehicle, was 172 people an hour. But when we transformed the street, there were 92% less people being exposed to that risk. Metrics like this, which show how much space was dedicated earlier to pedestrian facilities, to how much was dedicated after, making this more equitable and safer. And then collecting photographs to explain these metrics and showing how the speeds were lowered at these corridors. And we know that we can't collect all the metrics at every location. So we have to be strategic to collect different metrics at different locations, which we have the resources in terms of time, money available to us. And so you need to be selective, and you may choose 3 or 4 of the most powerful metrics for your project. There can be a methodology which can be quantitative, qualitative, inclusive, and contextual. And these data collection forms, as I was telling someone else, are again available as a free download on the GDCI website. So you can download them and use them in your city contexts. It's important to understand the timing of collecting metrics, whether you do it before, you do it during or after, and weeks or months after the implementation. And this is important to understand the short and long-term impacts of your projects. And it needs to be collected at different times of day, because the movement is different on weekdays and weekends, different at peak hours and off-peak hours. And lastly, it's about using the metrics to communicate success. Communicate it in forms which can be understood by more people. For the technical folks, there might be tables and graphs, but for the communities, you will use photographs and large metrics. Use powerful before and afters, which show the change, because as we like to say, seeing is believing. Like this drone image from a project in Delhi was a great way to show the city how their space had been reclaimed and get them excited about it. Show it to people, document the process, collect testimonials and videos, and before and after photographs with different elements which include people, which include all the road safety elements, and layer them up with metrics. So with that, we hope that this workshop, and these tools, as well as these publications, can help all of you in rethinking the way you engage with your stakeholders and the way you collect metrics for your next project in your city. So with that, I'm going to close this presentation, and we can jump into our last round of gameplay. I think we've got about 15 minutes for all of you to collect your thoughts, each group to note down your one challenge, one opportunity, and the one biggest disagreement between your group. Maybe some of you want to rethink the way you placed your cards based on what I shared earlier. And then in about 15 minutes, we'll start with a report back, with each group getting 2 or 3 minutes to share their insights from this workshop. Thank you. with all of us a little bit about her experience and recommendations or stakeholder engagement with different groups.
Thanks, Abhishek. And I am not going to take too long and hold you from your feedback on this very interesting activity that we did. I would like to really say that it was very impressive to see how, the organization is approaching design. It has inverted the pyramid and therefore addressing persons with special needs, including persons with disabilities, older persons, children, and etc. As so if we are designing our streets for these groups, then automatically we ensure that everyone gets included. So I'm really impressed by that approach. I would just want to talk very briefly about engaging with persons with disabilities. And I would like to mention that, when you go for community engagement, there could be that you don't have a person with disability who comes out, but that doesn't mean that they are not there. It just means that they have not been able to come to the site where you are holding your consultation. So therefore, persons with disabilities will always, they have to be a part of the stakeholder group consultations when you have, and please do not assume that if they are not there in your meeting, they don't exist. Please do not assume that. That's one thing. Second, when you are inviting persons with disabilities, please ensure that the venue where you're having your consultation is accessible for them and they are able to reach. Perhaps within the community, if you're having, that is, without long distances to travel, as we know, travel and transport is already so challenging for persons with disabilities. You may want to hold a consultation within the community so that's easy for them to come. And it has to be, the venue has to be accessible. Second, when you're inviting persons with disabilities, please provide reasonable accommodation. So there may be deaf participants, there may be persons with neurodiverse disabilities, there may be people who are blind. So how do you enable them to really understand what's going on in this consultation? How do you enable them to participate on an equal basis? Perhaps you need to provide sign language interpretation during the consultation. Maybe you need to provide some information in advance so that people can really understand in advance what they are expected to do when they come to the site. Maybe a need for information in Braille, or so please do consider the reasonable accommodation that people with disabilities may require. And I think I won't take too much. I'll just end by saying that when you're inviting persons with disabilities, and not just persons with disabilities, but any stakeholders, please be accountable to them. So please try and get back to them to let them know what were their suggestions that you were able to take on and what were the suggestions you were not able to take on and why. Because they have come, given time to your consultation and given their expertise and ideas. So there needs to be some kind of accountability and transparency of the process. And yeah, just one more thing. Persons with disabilities is a very diverse group. So please try and invite the diversity of persons with disabilities. It is not just persons with physical impairments or persons who are blind. It's a very diverse group. So try and get that when you're doing your consultations. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Shivani. That was very insightful, and we love that we get pushed further each day to think further and improve the process of shaping our urban streets. With that, I know that our online audiences have been patiently waiting for the longest time. And so I would like to begin the report back from one of the online groups, if that's okay. I would invite Lucia's group or team or breakout room 1 to come up first. Please feel free to unmute yourself and start with your report back, along with the 2 or 3 points that you're reporting back on your challenges, opportunity, as well as your biggest disagreement. Feel free to also share some of the metrics that you felt you wanted to collect, and any other feedback would be most welcome. So I'll pass it over to the online audience, and Lucia, to you and your team to share out first.
Thank you so much, Abhi. I will let, I don't know, Banu, Prerana.
1 second, we can't hear you, Lucia.
Okay. Please let me know. I will just continue talking to see if...
We can't hear you, Lucia.
Yeah. I will... Can you guys hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Great. So I don't know if any of my teammates in group 1 would like to take the word as well. Please feel free, Banu or Prerana, any of our teammates to take open the mic. Oops,
Okay.
now I share some feedback.
So just before coming out to the main session, we were discussing about the challenge which we can face in this plaza formation. So I was referring to the about the Indian culture, or specifically the Jaipur city where I belong to. And just exactly like we have a downtown shopping area in our city.
Sorry,
where
guys, we will have to request you to pause. We can't hear the online audience, and just give us a few minutes while we start with the report back from the in-person groups, and we'll come back to you, Lucia. Can we just wait for a few minutes while we sort out the technical challenge? And maybe we'll start with the last group at the back of the room with your report back, please.
Our reporter got some coffee now.
All right, we can move.
Okay.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, so maybe I can start. Okay, so our team is composed of, I guess, 6 members, including our newcomers. So we have several members from the local government of the Philippines. I'll not mention na lang the offices. And we have some private organizations as well and consultants. Okay, so our problem or our scenario is the interim plaza. So existing condition is irregular crosswalks create long pedestrian crossing distances, which increase exposure time for vulnerable users and encourage informal crossings along desired lines. And then due to its complex geometry, creates large tracts of underutilized pavements, etc. And some of the interim conditions, edges of the plaza are defined with official markings and planters that prohibit vehicles from entering the space. Number 2, a mix of permanent and temporary seating is provided to permit flexible use of the space and limit costs. Number 3, corners and other areas of a plaza that are subject to encroachment or turning vehicles are reinforced using heavy objects such as planters and bollards that alert drivers to the new curb line. Okay. So we identify our team as a government, the city government. So we're the city government implementing the project. And at our challengers deck is the business owner and the journalists.
Okay, and if you can share one of the biggest disagreements or pieces that you were confused as a group when defining the process.
Okay, So I think one of the biggest disagreements or challenges would be agreeing on the process itself. So since some of us came from the local government, some of us are from private institutions and are as consultants. There are variances in the processes that we are aware of. But later on, we've settled these concerns and moved on with the finalization of our steps or the timeline itself for the implementation of the project. And
Thank you.
Okay, so is that good?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can we go back to the next table on the other side of the room? And maybe you can share about your biggest disagreement and the metrics that you selected.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Our group is composed of the employees from the government of the Philippines, from the city government and national government. So our scenario is the same as the previous group, which is the interim plaza. And before we decided to choose our challengers, we had disagreements on who we need to choose. At first, we were choosing the politician and the residents, and we were deciding to be the nonprofit organization. But as we went along with the game, we decided to be on the city government side, and we chose the business owners and residents as our challengers. And after evaluating and proceeding with the game, we had identified our metrics and evaluation. So we categorized our metrics into two items, which are pedestrians and users. So for the pedestrians, since our scenario is involving the interim plaza, we decided that with this project, we will be able to increase pedestrian crossing volumes, percentage of users crossing compliantly and non-compliantly would be better, and more percentage of pedestrians walking on the roadbed. And for the end users, we decided that there will be a maximum amount of end users satisfied with this project. And I think the challenge would be for this project is the geometric design, because we identified that there are challenges with regards to the inclusiveness for persons with disabilities, since we observed that there are no ramps. And yeah, for the opportunities, we decided to have the opportunities for economic growth. Since this is an interim plaza, there would be a place for store owners to put up business along the sidewalks. And there would be more public spaces, since one of the roads is closed, and it would be an opportunity to improve the geometric design of the interim plaza.
Thank you so much. Great to see how you picked your challenger as the business owner and eventually decided to look at them as the biggest opportunity on the plaza. So I think that's the interesting process of picking stakeholders and making them the center of your projects in order to convert them from the naysayers to the yes people for this. Thank you so much. I think we're back to trying with the online audience. So back to Lucia and Prerna, if I believe, on the online room to share about your group. We'll keep it brief because we still have 5 more groups to go, but to share about your challenges, your metrics that you identified, please.
Thank you so much, Avi. Yeah, I will give the space to Prerna to continue sharing our process. Thank you, Prerna.
Thank you, Lucia and Abhishek. So we have discussed about the challenges, and we also identified the business owners and the politicians' major challenge. But also we were discussing at the time when we stopped, those are also an opportunity for us if we try to convince them, because Lucia was giving us the example of I think Bogota, where they have turned out the designed the pop-up designs beforehand, and then they turned out the challenge to the opportunity. So that was, we were discussing with each other, and I don't think so that we have any disagreement among the group on the process and the challenges. We were just discussing and trying to convert the challenges into opportunities, specifically the business owners and the politicians, in terms of the Asian cities where we have these more challenges. These people or stakeholders have as in more challenges to us. Anything Lucia or my group members want to add? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prerana Ranjini. I don't know if you want to add something. Please go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Lucia. I must first of all I want to take this opportunity to congratulate Aditi also for a great presentation she has mentioned. And secondly, the blocks were almost matching what we are doing at the ground level and how it is working. First of all, as I mentioned about the case study from our intervention, so stakeholder participation was less problematic for us. We have got the opportunity to work with them and how they have come forward and supported the entire things. And one of the interesting thing was in the game when we were discussing about the issues. So the media interaction at the time of inauguration, how the right data, the pre-data collection is so important that can be helpful to attract the stakeholder at the same time, because we need to convince them in the beginning. And media can play a major role while we are inaugurating our sessions accordingly, or the safe infrastructure intervention. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Prerna and Rajni, for all that feedback, as well as interesting to see that some of it relates and resonates with the work that you guys are already doing on ground. We're going to bring back the microphone into the room and move to the middle tables over here, please, to hear about maybe some of their metrics or challenges and disagreements that they might want to share as feedback from the game. They're currently disagreeing on who's going to present.
Yeah, I'll just go brief. So we assumed ourselves as the city government. So there was a question on like how the modality of implementation. So we thought that we will do ourselves. There is no NGO, no nothing. So it will be our labor, our procurement and everything. So there is no official handover. There is no official takeover. But as we said, that there was one question saying that what if it goes wrong? So we will do a chalk mark test as you showed in this thing. So we will run it for 2-3 days. If it goes well, we will go, but still it will be an interim design. So after weeks or months after, if we find that if the project targets are not reached and for some reason it brings more congestion, everything, we will dismantle everything and go back. So that is something that we thought. The metrics we identified, number of people walking, which we assume to be increased, local business sales, which we assume to be increased again, and the noise levels, we expect that to be reduced because the traffic volumes are reduced. Other than that, on the cards, we put some, what do you call them? We write the titles, what do you call them?
GoPros?
Yeah, no. No, the blank cards where we...
The wild card.
Yeah, sorry, wild card. So there are actually our challenges. We took residents, especially with cars and politicians. So what we thought is that from the beginning itself, we will engage them, especially the politicians, and we will invite him to cut the ribbon or whatever, so that he thinks that is his one. So the buy-in is always there. And residents, anyway, we will have number of community meetings with food served and everything, so that there is always interaction and everything like that. The one thing that we did thing is like weeks and after months, we will do a full evaluation check. So that was not there in the card, so that we inserted. So that's it, yeah.
Thank you so much. I think great to hear that you guys are using the wildcards. And a very important stakeholder, the car owners, right? In most of the cities that we are all working in, they tend to be the loudest voices and often having the biggest impact on the local politician. So getting them involved is definitely the right way to go. So we're going to go to the next group in the room, please.
So clearly the disagreement was again on who's going to report. But no, anyway, our group is composed of folks from the Davao Bus Project that are friends from Malaysia. So, but ultimately, our group output also worked on the interim plaza and with the perspective of a nonprofit organization. The resident and the politician were the challenges chosen, but we're not quite sure as to how that figured in the discussion. Maybe I'll just share, the way we did the activity was we distributed all cards, and then from there it was really just a team effort, and we trusted everybody's judgment as to where the cards were placed. And we didn't really criticize or or review the output. So all of this is approved without thinking, but really approved. Just kidding. Approved with complete trust and confidence in the team. Uh, and having said that, the metrics, the metrics that we were looking after, again, as thriving democracies, we chose from the list, and then and voted on which top three we will be choosing. Local business sales, number of people walking, number of people by type of stationary activity. And again, unfortunately, we didn't really have the time to go through the decisions, but I suppose that's also the challenge, just to try to gain some insights from that particular experience. When you don't have time, when you don't really have time to go through the details and rigors of a complete planning practice, what we can count on is the trust and confidence in the team. So thank you.
Thank you. Love the challenge, and feedback noted that the workshop should be longer. But with that, I think we wish every project on the ground was as smooth as your team to keep the process flowing. We're going to go back to the online audience and move it to Francisca's team to present their findings and feedback, if any.
Thanks, Avi, and hello, everyone. So our team was working on the one-way street scenario where we're trying to transform it into a street with a protected cycle lane, transit lane, curve extensions, and other strategies like that. I think we had very interesting conversations around community engagement, kids engagement, and communication, and also engaging our stakeholder, which was the engineer. So I'll pass it on to Bruce to tell you a little bit about the conversations we had.
Cool. Thanks, Francisca. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. I think there's just sort of picking up about 5 different points. Is number one, amongst any community participation is the communications. It's key to keep all of them in the loop as you go through the process, and I think it depends on how long that project's going to last. The second one is fundamental to build towards empowerment within the community, and while it's not specifically related to this particular project, it's sort of thinking around schools, and that part of it is identifying community leaders. If they don't have the necessary skills to continue through, is looking at building those skills as needed. And bear in mind is at the end of it is any outcome that the community is happy with is all about ownership, but more importantly is having them involved through the processes. They can say they did it themselves, and I think that's actually one of the powerful things is they take ownership of it. We facilitate that process. we've also got to think about all of the users. It's coming back to that smart thinking: is who is going to be affected, what are those impacts going to be, and how can we mitigate some of those impacts on them? So I think with it is, if you sort of decide that you want to do something on a street to sort of depower it, what's their alternative? And maybe that alternative is something we may need to do something on an adjacent side road around it. So I think that then keeps it in the loop. That's the give and take approach around it. In terms of promises, is trials are great around it. The key thing is, if it's a success, is do we then have the funds to come up with a permanent solution? So I think we have to be very mindful as we move forward, is we working towards a successful outcome with the trial. Have we got the funds there to make it successful thereafter to actually create a permanent facility? And I think that's fundamental. And my experience with some of their traffic engineers is that's not always the case around it. So we've got to be very transparent with that, as that's part of us working together to deliver successful outcomes. And I think in terms of matrices, as you're having a look at a range of things, is we're starting to think about the wider community benefits. Is we will have a target audience. We will be looking at metrics associated with that. But by the same token, is we also need to have a think about the community. With some of the things that we do, is are there wider community benefits? I was thinking, if we're dealing with just stuff around school safety, is what about parents walking their kids to school? Is it's not just the kids that are getting there, it's all of a sudden we might find the parents are starting to make their way through there as well, if they feel it's safer, because typically kids have a lot less fear than parents do. So we've got to take parents out of the equation. So if we want to have honest conversations, so to speak, let's talk to the kids in those sort of situations. So it's just some thoughts from my experience anyway, but hopefully that's of benefit.
Thanks so much, Bruce, for beautifully articulating a lot of the conversations that your team had, and some very valuable insights for all of us in the room on how we can expand these conversations with different groups and how we can look at the timeline beyond the interim. I think one of the powerful pieces that you mentioned is thinking about the long-term sustenance. Do we have the funds to maintain it? Do we have the funds to go to capital construction? And all very important questions. We've got 3 minutes and 3 groups left. So we're going to keep these to brief 1-minute updates, maybe one big challenge or something, and we'll just pass it to the last 3 groups in the room, please.
Hello. Yeah, okay. Okay, hi. Good afternoon. So, yeah, so the 3 of us are from the Department of Transportation, specifically the Active Transport Project Office. So we are the ones doing the the active transport infrastructures nationwide. So to cut the thing short, and as we have to move forward with other groups, we just like to explain how we did the process. So basically, we just did it based on how we do it in the office. We started planning, of course, defining the scope of the project and the vision. However, usually in our context, we usually start with community engagement, since we understand that this is something, it's quite new. The idea is quite new in our country, so we try to speak forward, to talk to those who are going to be affected by the project before we finalize the scope and the project details. So after that process, the planning and the community engagement and getting the funds, we just move forward with the usual process of implementation, and we go forward with inauguration. Of course, maintenance and evaluation goes afterwards, after the implementation. So we chose 2 stakeholders that for us is somewhat challenging, yeah. challenging for us. Usually, the politicians in the Philippine context, if you're not familiar with it, so I think our friends here knows the struggles that we experience every time we talk to this decision makers in the local and in the national level. And for us to implement these kinds of project, we really have to defend the specifics or the objectives of what we're doing, and that's why data is very important for us, which is which is lacking at the moment, but we're trying to catch up as well. Aside from that, based on the context that we got, based on the scenario that we got, it's the scenario 2, the street redesign. One of the challenges that we can experience from there is the business owner, since this is a commercial area. So we chose in one of the metrics, we chose local business sale as part of the things that can be studied after the implementation, because that's what we can show them, the sales. If it goes up, then it's good. And then after that, the street modal share is also one that we chose, because we can hit both the number of people walking and cycling data from there. And then aside from that, we also chose the speed limits of the drivers, since we're talking about safety.
Thank you so much.
I think that's all.
Great to hear. If you can pass the mic on to the next table, and great to hear that you're picking metrics that are related to your challengers so that you can try and convince them on how to support these projects going forward. 1 minute, and we'll keep it short and crisp.
Are you ready? All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Christina. I'm from Movers One Coalition. And in our group, we are a mix of advocates and people from different organizations as well, including consulting. Okay. All right. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but the main consideration that we had for the entire plan is how to work with the negative side, and that would be on the political area. So when it comes to pushing for change and reforms, right, we consider the dimensions of politics, finances, technical, administrative, and community. But the most critical part of reforms and change should be on the political side. So a critical action point that we included, which has to be at the very beginning, is to build political buy-in. And it's not just a matter of talking to the local chief executives, telling them what you're going to do. It's actually showing them how it gives them a political advantage and how to lock in the project in terms of policy, local ordinance, and also how this might actually be able to translate into votes. Local elections happen, of course, like almost every 3 years, and it's very important to have that kind of factor built in the entire thing. Another thing that are we done?
Sorry.
All right, okay, and how are we going to measure this success? Local business sales, number of people satisfied, and how that translates into more votes. And of course, modal share. And a critical part of that is, of course, recognizing what the politicians have done to make sure this project is a success. Thank you.
One quick point from Conrad, and then we move to the other group.
Yeah, Conrad from the ASEAN GIZ Summer Project. Just to bring all of this back to the real world, I've been working on such projects for several years now, and I think it's worth mentioning that every city, every culture has a unique DNA. Abhimanyu, you and I, we had the pleasure of working in Ethiopia 7 years ago now, and there they were extremely proactive. The local government were very receptive to these ideas, in part because a lot of the officers that worked in the city government were walking, they were on foot. In my experience in the ASEAN region, that isn't always the case. There is not always a positive attitude towards these projects. They sometimes seem a bit too exotic, maybe a bit too fluffy, and it's just not the priority of many cities. And to approach projects like this, sometimes you have to frame them differently. In the Cambodian context where I'm working, I don't know if active mobility is a top priority at the moment, but sorry, I'm looking at you, Kongsapal, but we will soon bring you an interesting proposal, and it's to do a project exactly like this, but it's framed as a road safety project. We are tightening an intersection. We will improve the flow of traffic in doing so, but in the process, we will make it a much better pedestrian space. And we've just had to shift the narrative slightly to sell the idea. And another project we're working on in Baguio at the moment.
Sorry, Conrad, I'm gonna keep you on time for this one, for the second project. But I think very interesting combination of what both of you said. You spoke about, the first speaker spoke about political leadership, political buy-in, and it's very important to change the narrative for every political scenario. You can't sell everything as road safety. It might have to be air quality. It might have to be more sales for the business owners. It may have to be many, many other things which fit the political mandate of that context to make sure these projects are a success. So that's a very, very insightful piece. I'm sorry to interrupt, but if we can quickly move to the last group. And before that, huge thank you to everyone for waiting a few extra minutes in this workshop.
Hi, well, I'll acknowledge my teammates. They're the best in this group. I'm sorry, but they're the best, Malaysia, etc. Okay, our scenario was that we are the city government and it's a street redesign. So cutting it short, of the three elements, the challenges, the opportunities, the disagreement, they all sort of relate to community engagement and the when do you present the designs. So for instance, we said, do we present the community with the designs before or after the Department of Transport Commissioner sign off? Okay, if it's election year, maybe we would. If it's not election year, maybe we wouldn't. Okay, and then we used a lot of wildcards in relation to these. So, for instance, we decided to have an iRAP rating of some of the designs. We decided to take the opportunity to reintroduce these elements at every phase. So let's have more community engagement. Let's have more vetting the designs as we went through.
Thank you. I think that was a great feedback to wrap up the session today, which was about how the process is iterative. There's not enough times that you can engage the community. There's not enough times that you can continue to refine the design and implement it. Of course, you don't want perfection to be what's holding you back, but we need to push ourselves. We need to push stakeholders and all the project. So once again, a huge thank you to all of you in the room and even more so to everyone online for participating in today's workshop. A round of applause for all of yourselves. A huge thank you to Dave and the entire team at ADB for organizing and putting this together. To Greg, Jignesh, and Monica from iRAP for helping facilitate, as well as all the presentation material that enriched the conversation further. My colleagues online, Francisca, Lucia, and Uditi over here, and all the facilitators in the room who helped us through all the tech challenges and making sure that the workshop went well. So happy to stick around and be in the room to take any feedback. We would request all of you to leave the board as it is, because we would love to take pictures, because we learn from how each of you define your process. We learn from all the wild cards that you write on so that we can add them to future decks. Hope you guys enjoyed and found this useful, and we would love to stay in touch. Thank you so much.